Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Fertility Confidence Podcast. I have part one of a two-part series today because my guest and we spoke for a little over an hour when we recorded this episode. And quite honestly, we probably could have continued on for longer. So I decided we're going to split this sucker up into two pieces. We're going to go through part one of this amazing interview today. And then next week, you can come back, check in for part two. So if you aren't already subscribed to the podcast, now is the time because you are not going to want to miss next week's episode either. My guest, Lisa Hendrickson-Jack, is someone that I personally have been dying to interview for a very long time. And after we had Lily, the co-author of her amazing book, Real Food for Fertility, Lisa and Lily actually wrote this book together. After I spoke to Lily about Real Food for Fertility, she was like, "You have to chat with Lisa." And I was like, yes. Finally, I feel like I've made it. Lisa is an amazing resource, not just in the fertility community, but in the fertility awareness method community, the charting community, the cycle community. And her book, one of her other books, The Fifth Vital Sign, is something that I recommend all women read, regardless if you are embarking on your fertility journey or not, to really just get a wonderful understanding of the importance of knowing your cycle. So in my world, people, you guys are listening to this podcast, clients come and work with me. You follow me on Instagram at Fertility Confidence Method if you aren't already, because you're either actively trying to get pregnant or you're about to, right? And so you're being proactive and you're looking for resources. And while all that's, hunky-dory and dandy, we talk a lot about how to properly track your cycle in the realm of fertility to help time intercourse. But even outside of the fertility, journey, understanding these aspects of your cycle are so important. And I think I actually shared this in an episode. I can't remember now. I don't know. Time's a blur. I can't believe it's June, first and foremost, where I was talking about, maybe it wasn't an episode, maybe it was on Instagram. Anyways, it doesn't matter. I was talking about my temp drop and how I got my temp drop actually after I had Nyla, because I wanted to continue charting. I wasn't just going to stop charting because I'd had babies. We felt like our family was complete. I knew that it was something that I wanted to continue to do in order to understand my hormones, my health. There's so much more to it. And I love that aspect of like what I do with clients is like, you're here working with me because you want to get pregnant. And yeah, that's our main goal. But I also know the long-term vision and how having this knowledge and understanding now is only going to help you later in life, even outside of the fertility journey, which is so wonderful. So if you don't know Lisa, I highly recommend giving her a follow and listening to her podcast. She is a certified fertility awareness educator and holistic reproductive health practitioner who trains women's health practitioners to use their menstrual cycle as a vital sign in their practice. She's the founder of the Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship Program, and she's the author of 3 best-selling books, The Fifth Vital Sign, highly recommend, Fertility Awareness Mastering Charting Workbook, and then her most recent book with Lily Nichols, Real Food for Fertility, which we are loving over here. I have a copy on my desk. We are loving this over at Fertility Confidence Method. I think it's such a great comprehensive resource. Her and Lily did a really great job. And something that I mentioned in the episode with Lisa that will probably be in next week's in part 2, because I believe it was near the end, was how I was just so impressed with all of the literature and resources that they used for this novel book. And so much so that they couldn't actually put it in the book because the book was going to be too big. So they had to have this like separate reference document that you can download, which I think is so, so funny. And that's exactly what would happen if I wrote a book. So it truly sounds like a lot of work. And they really did a great job of putting a very comprehensive piece of work together, not just helping from a nutrition standpoint, but it also has a wonderful section on transitioning off of birth control, which is exactly what Lisa and I spoke about in this 2-part series, is the impact hormonal birth control has on women's cycles and their fertility. And then the transitioning period off of hormonal birth control. We talked about the importance of realistic expectations and informed consent, which is just not something that I think we really see, unfortunately, when we're put on birth control. And then we're also going to cover in this part 1 episode the role of nutrition and the importance that specific nutrient depletions from hormonal birth control play in the fertility game. So we're going to cover a lot of things here in this first piece and get into the nutrition aspect. And then next week, we are going to wrap up with some other really interesting topics from mine and Lisa's conversation. Lisa also is the host of an amazing podcast called Fertility Friday. Again, I highly recommend checking it out. And if you're someone who has struggled with understanding your chart, I also get a lot of benefit out of some of Lisa's posts and things of her just sharing charts and examples and talking about different trends and patterns that you can see, because it can be confusing. Even as a practitioner, I look at charts every single day. And so Lisa's a wealth of knowledge in terms of what your chart is actually telling you. And when it comes to fertility, we're looking for very specific signs. And something that we actually start chatting about in the episode is also transitioning off, what that timeline looks like, transitioning off of hormonal birth control, what that timeline looks like, and actually how charting can play a role in that like waiting period when you're not quite ready to get pregnant as well. So there is so much to unpack here. Like I said, this is part 1. So part 2 is going to come next week. I hope you guys enjoy it. I'm going to put all of Lisa's links and things and all the stuff you want to check out with her over in the show notes. Make sure you go give her a follow, check out her podcast, and I will see you guys in the next episode. Take care. Welcome to the Fertility Confidence Podcast, Lisa. It's so nice to have you on.
Thank you for having me.
I have been waiting patiently, maybe not so patiently. I'm obsessed with your book. I recommend Real Food for Fertility to all of our clients right now. Everyone's really enjoying it. So after Lily and I got to have a conversation a few weeks ago, she's like, you really should sit down with Lisa. And I was like, yes, please send me her email. I would love to. So thank you for joining me today. I'm really excited to talk a little bit more about birth control and its potential influence and how we can support ourselves specifically when we're transitioning off with fertility and conception in mind. But why don't we start with you just sharing a little bit about yourself for all of our listeners?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much. That's such a wonderful compliment. I'm so glad to hear that your clients have been loving it. It was definitely a labor of love for Lily and I. So a little bit about myself. I mean, I've been in the fertility awareness field for the past 2 decades, a little over 20 years. I just discovered fertility awareness at a really young age. I myself had some challenges with my period, like many women. I had really painful and also heavy periods from the beginning. And so part of my journey was going on the pill and discovering, even though I didn't have the language to describe it that I do now, discovering that it didn't really fix it. So, I would go on it. My periods, air quotes, periods were lighter and they were easier to manage. And I was a child, I was a teenager. So I thought, oh, okay, I'm fixed. Sweet. Right. So I would come off of the pill every now and then because back in high school, I wasn't using it for birth control. Yet when I would come off, my true periods would come back and they would be just as bad as they were before. Okay. So I was fortunate to discover at a young age that there was a difference between the pill period and the real period. When I needed birth control, I was also very fortunate to discover fertility awareness. And within, when I was in my 20s, it was very grassroots. We were teaching women in coffee shops. There was a group of us that took a class together. So great times. But I didn't think that it could be something that I could do for a living. I mean, to age myself, this is before smartphones.
Right.
All that stuff. So I just couldn't see it. But then fast forward to when I got married, had my first son, and I knew that this information had really transformed my experience. And it was at that time I started looking around and noticing how many couples were struggling with fertility challenges. So I started to think, okay, well, let me just put this out there and see if anybody is interested in what I have to say. And so many years later now, obviously they were interested. And that's how I kind of started. Like, who gave me a microphone, right?
I say that all the time. Like, how did I get access to this? No one should have given me this microphone.
Haven't been able to shut up since. So we're going strong.
Oh my gosh, I love that. And we have very similar journeys with, like, you know, my whole story started with my birth control journey as a teenager. For me, it was for acne, not even for my period. And also, luckily, in my early 20s, had a moment of realization of like, this can't be normal. Like, this can't be it. Like, and I've literally had doctors in my teens be like, well, it's just part of being female. Like, either you, because I was very not, my biggest complaint on the pill when I was younger that I remember was it didn't actually fix my acne, which was the whole point, but I was incredibly sick for like 2 out of the 3 weeks every single month. Like, missing school, taking Gravol just so I could function, vomiting, type of sick from the hormones. And everyone just kept telling me like, you'll get used to it. Just keep trying, keep trying. And I would literally have male doctors tell me like, well, this is like, it's either you have acne or you deal with the nausea, like you, and just kind of push through it. I was like, finally was like, this can't be it. And that's sort of how I found even naturopathic medicine, was like through that journey. And I think in getting into this field, and especially being able to talk a lot about fertility awareness and cycle tracking with my niche with fertility and clients, is that a lot of people have a very similar story to ours.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. So what I think it's safe to say that like a large proportion of women are on some form of hormonal birth control at some point in their lives for a wide variety of reasons. And at least here in Ontario, for me at least, and this was a long time ago, it wasn't given to me for contraception or for period concerns. It was quite literally given to me at 14 for my skin. And so it just, there's tons of reasons why you might have gone on it for whatever reason. But when they're ready to start their family, I feel as though we're not having informed consent conversation around what that timeline can look like. And so through all of your work that you've done, what do you find that timeline of transitioning off of birth control, specifically hormonal birth control, looks like for couples who are hoping to start their family?
Mm-hmm. It's a good question, and we can spend some time like hang out here for a little while, because I mean, as you phrase the question, like, what does that look like? I mean, what it typically looks like for people is that they're, you know, I've spoken to so many women, and you've probably had the same experience, where they go to their doctor after years of being on birth control to kind of, and even this baffles me. So I'm already baffled. I'm thinking like, why are you asking your doctor permission to come off the pill? And whatever. But this is what we do, right? This is how we've been ingrained to do.
Yeah.
So we go to the doctor and it's like, I've been on this pill for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever it is. My partner and I are getting married in the fall, or we're planning to start a family next year, whatever it is. And, you know, what do you think I should do? Should I come off of early just to see what my cycles are like? And categorically, they're always told, no, they shouldn't.
Right.
Because as soon as you get off the pill, you'll get pregnant right away. So you may as well not come off early. And so, you know, etc.
Wait till you're ready. That's the party line, right?
And I mean, the number of times I've had conversations like this, and I always like to put it into perspective. You know, these are women who their intuition is telling them, like, it's a little alarm going off inside of them. And it's loud enough that you legitimately like called your doctor's office, made an appointment, took a shower, like, clothes, drove across town. Like, you literally sat in the office. Who wants to sit in a doctor's office
for extra time? Probably.
You were probably waiting longer. All of that to be told no. So I always like to kind of frame it like that, because it's so interesting how we can override our natural instincts. And then I've also been on the other side of it. So one of the interesting things about my work is that, you know, I'm supporting women to often transition off of hormonal birth control, learn how to chart their cycles for whatever reason. And I've observed women have, let's say, 2 distinct experiences. So woman A comes off birth control, but she's actually like hormonal birth control, but she's actually not ready to start trying to conceive yet. So in this scenario, she's wanting to learn charting, like that's what I do. And so I'm teaching her. When she comes off birth control, there's a transition period. And what the research tells us is it lasts anywhere from about a year to a year and a half. And with certain birth control methods, especially the shot, it can last even longer than that. So the woman who's not actively trying to conceive, who's, she's come off, maybe she's using condoms for a while, she's learning to chart her cycles, she watches this unfold. So there's some very common things we might observe during that transition phase. We might see limited mucus production. We might see that it sometimes for some women, it takes a while for their cycle to come back at all. So that could be a few weeks, it could be a couple months, depending on the situation. If there's an underlying issue, it could take a little bit longer than that. And because in my hypothetical example, she's not actively trying to conceive, she might be a little bit concerned, but she's not really stressed out about it. You know what I mean? Like, it's inconvenient and she's watching it happen. But, in the context of like, she's in one of my programs or whatever, and we're charting, she's learning about it. She's replenishing nutrients. Like, she's doing all these things. She's kind of, sorting it out. And eventually her cycle does return. It takes a little while to normalize. But within 6 to 12 months, typically we actually see a bit of a shift and the cycle's a lot more robust. I've had a number of clients in that scenario. And when they're able to take that time to prepare for pregnancy, they learn how to chart, they kind of identify if there's any issues with their cycle through this process, and they're able to resolve them without the pressure of actively trying to conceive at the same time. It's very different. And I've had a number of clients who then, like a year out, they just start trying and they conceive. I've had a number of clients conceive pretty easily after that point and whatever. So as you can imagine in example B, so hypothetical scenario B, where you have someone who's come off birth control to conceive and they're ready to conceive right away. It can be very, very different because the same transition phase is unfolding. No one told her about it. She's not aware of it. She wasn't expecting it. This is after a lifetime of being told we could get pregnant on any day of our cycle, including like there's no safe day. This was my junior high education anyways. There's no safe days, like all the things. So like the first month she's okay, but by month 2 she's freaking out. By month 3, month 4, she's wondering if there's something wrong. And often by month 5 or 6, she might even be in a doctor's office getting fertility tests and treatment. So like to kind of get back to the question of it, what we talk about in Real Food for Fertility is kind of like a different path. It's what you said. It's that informed consent piece. So obviously it's possible for somebody to come off of hormonal contraceptives and conceive right away. Like I know people who conceived while they were still taking them. So obviously this is a possibility. But what we do know, I think the best way to answer the question is to go to what the research has to say. So there's a couple different studies that we were looking at. One study looks at the actual time to pregnancy. And so they had, and it's kind of difficult to find studies that this one compared, the one I'm thinking of, it compared a variety of different contraceptives. So it compared the condom to the birth control pill, the combined contraceptive, as well as the progesterone only pill. It compared it to the IUD as well as the shot. So there was like a variety, which was really interesting. But most studies don't. And the other thing I'll say about that study is it also broke it down like month over month.
Oh, that's fascinating.
So what you find when you look at the research, because as you can appreciate, most of the research just says it's fine. And you kind of have to look at why. So most of the research on this topic, they don't break it down month over month. They look at a year and they look at a total percentage and they say X percent of women conceived after coming off the pill. So we're all good. And then that's the end of the conversation. So when you break it down month over month, what this study showed was that the women who had used condoms, so non-hormonal methods, so they just literally stopped using the condom, it took an average of about 4 months to conceive, which is right on what we know about the average time to conception for a normal healthy couple, 25% chance per cycle. The women who came off of the combined oral contraceptives, it took an average of 8 months. So what's interesting is when you read a lot of research, that wouldn't concern researchers. Like when you read what their comments on that are, it's like, well, the year mark is great and everything's good. But how this plays out in a woman's life is very different. Because that's an average. So that means obviously some women conceived sooner, but some women conceived after that 8-month mark. Some women might have consumed a year out. And if nobody's telling these women that literally the women who came off of the pill that everyone takes took twice as long to conceive compared to those that didn't, then they don't have a heads up that maybe they should be considering coming off a bit sooner. And then the shot, for argument's sake, was like 15 to 18 months.
Yeah.
And the study even broke it down into what they called long-term and short-term use. And they define long-term use as 2 years or more,
Oh,
which
that's
is
it?
really, yes.
That seems
That's
short term to me.
this is exactly what it is. So in the research, that was long term. And so in
Oh, wow.
the real world, women are taking the pill for 5 years and 10 years and 15
Right.
years. I think the client who like I can think of a couple clients like who took it the most. Like I have 30 years. I had a client who had taken it for 30 years. So although that's not typical, yeah. So
It happens,
that
yeah.
it's a lot of food for thought. There was a second research study that we looked at that I think it provides a different perspective. So instead of looking at the specific time to pregnancy, it was looking at the cycle characteristics. And so it was saying, okay, so we have 200 plus women who've never used contraception. We have 200 plus women who just came off of contraception, hormonal contraception. So, how, like if we put the cycle characteristics of these women side by side, how long does it take before the women who came off the pill, their cycles, were basically indistinguishable. So that was really interesting because they're looking at the cycle length, they're looking at mucus patterns, they're looking at the luteal phase, when is ovulation happening, all these different things. And on average, it took anywhere from 9 to 12 cycles before they were indistinguishable, before they really looked the same. So obviously these women were then, ovulating and things at, at some point, and the first cycle tended to be longer. The first few cycles tend to have a significantly reduced luteal phase, like the second half of the cycle. But really, it took time to normalize. And what I love about being a research nerd is that when I'm working with clients, I see these things in their cycles, but then I'm able to find, when I'm lucky, like when I hit a gold mine, but I'm able to find the research that actually explains what I'm seeing.
Right.
So what I've seen is very consistent with this. So this is a really long way of answering the question, but you can appreciate how it's helpful to kind of flesh it out and to really like look at, because it's not just me being like, this is what I think because I think so, because it's, right? It's just not about that. It's about like, what is the data so that women can feel more informed and then make an informed decision about what to do. So out of this comes essentially our recommendation. So if you have the information that we just shared, if you're on the pill and you're thinking about conceiving, I know everybody doesn't have the longest time window, but I think it's useful to think about coming off birth control. I mean, I tend to toward the longer end of it, but I would say an absolute minimum of 6 to 12 months.
Yeah.
And the caveat to that would be if you were just taking the pill for birth control and you have no history of any type of cycle issues. Right. As soon as we add a history of cycle issues, hormonal imbalances, like extreme PMS symptoms, extreme period pain, whatever it is, irregular cycles, like you were put on the pill to kind of resolve any type of period issue, then I would highly recommend 18 months to 2 years, especially that kind of long irregular cycle scenario when like you didn't know when your next period was going to come. Because what the research, I think what we also need to know about the research is, again, when you look at those studies that say everything's great and they look at the 12-month mark, they have excluded everybody who had those cycle issues. And they'll tell you, you can read through the information. They'll say, we excluded women who had irregular cycles or who never got their period or whatever. So if you are in that camp, you're not even part of the study. So and the reason you're not part of the study is because they know that you're at a higher risk of not getting your period back in a reasonable amount of time. You're going to make the study results look bad.
Right.
And
they
this
just
is
you.
Exactly. And so it's important though, because nowhere in this conversation did I say that the pill causes people to not get their period anymore or causes them to, right? We're talking about a transition phase. So when you look at the research, I haven't seen data to suggest that the pill has this permanent negative effect, but there is this temporary transition. Yeah. And then for those women in the other category, what the pill is doing is it's masking whatever the issue is. So I love analogies. And so I have this like silly analogy. So in my analogy, let's pretend, because I don't have a summer house, but let's pretend I have a summer house by the lake. You said you live in Ontario, so I also live in Ontario. So it's a big, like,
I would love a summer house by the lake too, where it's always summer, ideally.
I know. So we can't be in Ontario.
So California house, maybe.
Yeah. All right. Well, so we've got the summer house, and unfortunately, the pipes burst. So we're definitely in Canada. There's winter, and the pipes burst. So in my scenario, like what my bright idea is, right? I went to my doctor. My doctor told me to, shut off the water.
Mm-hmm.
So the pill, that's like what the pill does to our body, because it doesn't fix the pipes. Like it just shuts off the water so that we don't have the flooding. So it gets rid of the symptom. So I'm excited, no more flooding. I fix the house, but I don't fix the pipes. So what happens when I turn them on? Like, right?
Right.
I think it's the perfect analogy, because
That's
then,
great.
yeah, because this is the whole point that we're trying to make. Like the pill doesn't cause the women who had this history of irregular cycles or problematic scenarios to have a problem down the line. But the pill gave a false sense of security by providing that monthly withdrawal bleed. So we thought everything was great. We're ticking that box every 28 days, thinking it's all good. But then you come off the pill. And especially if you had that history and you haven't had a true bleed in like 10 years or 5 years or whatever, like you really don't know what's going to happen when you come off. Like you don't. Yeah. And what we know for sure is that the pill didn't correct whatever was going on. Mm-hmm. And so like back to that doctor's office example that I gave at the beginning of this, when that doctor says, yeah, it's fine, like it's literally based on nothing.
Right.
Because we haven't even had, like, I'm guaranteeing you that the doctor, I mean, please, if I'm wrong, if someone's listening and they're like, no, my doctor totally asked me everything about my history and like all, but like, I'm pretty much guaranteeing you that didn't happen. So it's literally just words out of someone's mouth that has nothing to do with your specific situation.
Right. They're hearing, I don't want to get pregnant right now. I want to get pregnant, in a couple of months or 6 months or what have you, or next year. So logically in that reasoning, it's like, okay, well, just wait till then. Because like you said at the beginning, we were all taught in school that if you aren't on the pill as a teenager, you can get pregnant at any moment forever. And we know now through all the education, I hope for everyone listening that like, we know that that's not true anymore. And I think this was a really good way to break it down. And I can hear already some people listening being like, oh my God, like I just came off and now I'm hearing it might take 8 months to 18 months for everything to really regulate. And I think we can flip that and say like, if we understand that there is this transition period and that the transition period is different for everybody because it's not always going to take that long, but it can also help to just lessen the burden a little bit of you constantly wondering and searching for what is wrong with me, when we can say like, okay, you just came off the pill. I love asking people, what was your cycle like before you went on hormonal birth control? I think that's so valuable for us to be like, okay, like now what are we watching for? Are these things going to come back? Were they completely symptom free? Like, is that what we can hope for? And that can just help guide us in those early months of support through your fertility journey to hopefully speed the process along a little bit if we can, but more than anything, really just set realistic expectations, which is kind of what this whole conversation has been about, essentially, is how do we set realistic expectations for women who are put on the pill when they're 13 and have no idea what's going on. And now it's been usually, like you said, 10 to 15 years, and we haven't even had a follow-up conversation about the pill or whatever you've been using, unless you've had side effects, essentially. So you want to start tracking your BBT, but all of the rules feel maybe just a little bit difficult. Or maybe you've actually already tried your oral BBT tracking and you are constantly forgetting to take your temperature. Your charts are super hard to interpret because your temps are all over the place, and you're feeling like maybe this is actually adding stress into your journey. I felt the exact same way when I started using BBT tracking for my own fertility journey, and I actually remember when my partner and I went backwoods camping and he could not stop laughing because I still packed my little pink thermometer in my backpack, but I was super dedicated, so dedicated that it actually started to impact my sleep. So when I heard about Temp Drop, I was instantly curious, and after over 2 years of using the device personally, I will never pick up an oral BBT thermometer again. Temp Drop is a wearable arm device that continuously tracks your temperature during your sleep and provides you with the most accurate basal body temperature through its advanced sensors and sophisticated algorithms. No more waking up at the same time every morning, no more worrying about waking up in the night, no more forgotten temps messing with your chart. Temp Drop literally eliminates all of the complicated rules of oral BBT temping and lets you have an accurate fertility tracker without all the added stress. Temp Drop can be used if you're a restless sleeper, a night shift worker, have long or irregular cycles, or maybe you're up nursing or up with your kids and still actually have the peace of mind that the data is being collected. I am obsessed with my Temp Drop and how easy it is to chart my cycle now. So I am super thrilled to offer you guys, my podcast community, a 12% discount on your Temp Drop device using the code KelseyTD. And you can combine this with any current promotion that the company is having.
Well, and we can expand the conversation. It's not about, am I going to get pregnant or not only, because we also want to talk about optimizing. So,
Right.
This also comes from a place, like for both Lily and myself. I mean, we both work with clients, but we also have children,
Right.
So I'm a mother. I have 3 children, 11, 8, and almost 2.
Oh.
And so the other thing about this is that this isn't just about getting pregnant. It's about preparing your body, because one thing we know in the research as well is that the pill is known for depleting a slew of nutrients. And it just so happens to be the nutrients that are also essential for healthy pregnancy and a healthy baby, particularly B vitamins and zinc and selenium and even vitamin A and coenzyme Q10. I mean, those are key nutrients for a variety of things, including egg quality and supporting hormonal health. So if we're thinking about how to prepare for pregnancy, I feel like this is one of the challenges with the medical system in general, because they don't want to tell us about the side effects. They don't want to tell us about any of these possible downsides, because they're always the kind of party line is like, oh, well, we don't want to scare women off of using the pill. So we want, and this is in the research too, like they don't want to discourage women from using the pill because they see it as the panacea for everything.
Right.
But we can't sacrifice the informed consent piece from my perspective, because we are adults here. So you can tell us what the deal is, and then it gives us the ability to make the decision. Because, I mean, I do have my reservations and issues with the pill, but I took the pill as a teenager, and most of my clients have taken the pill, and like 100 million women statistically are on it right now. So, I mean, this isn't about saying no one should use the pill, but it's, I always say that if you provide this information to women about the pill, and I mean, this is just the coming off. There's lots of information about the side effects and all that. But if you provide women that information, I feel like women kind of fall into 3 camps. Like camp A, some women will be kind of scared off. They're like, I don't know about this, and this doesn't feel right for me, and so I don't want to do it. Some women will say, well, this is good that I know, like this is still what's best for me right now, but they'll modify their use. So, for some women, if they knew all this stuff about the pill, they would have still taken it when they really needed it the most. But I feel like there's a lot of women who would have maybe like taken it, let's just give a hypothetical, like you're taking it in college, everything's really stressful, but then you find yourself in a more stable relationship. You have a little bit more time to kind of sort out other potential alternatives that are non-hormonal. So some women would kind of modify their use, and instead of the 15 years, maybe they use it for like 8, or maybe they use it for 5. And similarly, with this conversation around preparing for pregnancy, I think that there are a lot of women who, if they had known how long it would have taken their cycle to come back, or their cycle to normalize, or the effect that it might have had, that they may have chosen to come off earlier. Yeah. And just like you said, I mean, it's not about scaring people, but it's also the conversation about nutrition, preconception nutrition. Ideally, we're taking at least 3 to 6 months before to start eating better and to incorporate a lot of the foods we talk about in the book. And if you have a history of certain risk factors, like if you significantly underate for a long time or followed a really restrictive diet, then we recommend even up to a year of preconception, and not just for you and your partner. So from that perspective, when we start thinking about like, how do we prepare our body? The first thought I had when I gave birth to my eldest son was like, where did you come from? I obviously knew where he came from because I had just pushed him out, but it was crazy because I remember like I looked at him and I'm just thinking, this human just came out of my body, like literally, like how did this happen? When you think about it from that perspective, that's how important this stage is, all of the nutrition we're putting in our body, even before we're actually pregnant, because this is what sets the stage. Even when we get into the topics of egg and sperm quality, I mean, these are things that the egg that we ovulate this month, whatever we were eating over the past 3 to 4 months is really going to have an impact of whatever the ovulation is this month. And similarly with your partner's sperm, whatever he was doing 3 to 4 months ago, you can think back, that's what is going to determine the quality of his sperm. So when we elevate that conversation, hopefully we're moving from the place of like, oh my gosh, I'm so scared, it's going to take me this long, to wow, like now I have this information and I can actually prepare. Like no one told me this. And
right.
Yeah, you should be a little bit mad that no one told you that. We got to like get our education systems in a better shape.
Right. Yeah. And I think right now, at least, really the only recommendation is, when you're ready, just come off the pill and start taking a prenatal vitamin. And I think the book does a really good job of saying like, prenatal vitamin, absolutely. And there's a lot more to it than that. So if we could circle back to like the nutrient depletion and how we can maybe incorporate more foods through this transition, what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I listed several nutrients that the pill is like kind of known for depleting. And I think like folate, we all know how important folate is. I mean, that's like the one thing they tell us to do.
Yeah.
So we know it must be pretty important. So, I mean, in the book, we focus on several key foods. I mean, we focus on organ meats, liver and organ meats, liver in particular, because it's one of the most nutrient dense foods on the planet. In my kind of nerdy brain, I often think to myself, vitamins were invented, a few hundred years ago or a couple hundred years ago. Mm-hmm. So what did all the people do before that?
Yeah.
And so when you look at this concept of ancestral nutrition and you kind of look at researchers who did look at foods in this way, we see that these traditional cultures were regularly incorporating the organ meat. So, going even beyond the liver, past people's comfort zones these days, right? To eat,
like, people are like, oh, turning it off.
Yeah. All right.
Liver.
I listened to it up today. She wants me to eat what? But I mean, if you look at the nutritional composition of these foods, they just so happen to conveniently contain those things that we really need when we're trying to make babies. Mm-hmm. So liver is an excellent source of vitamin B12 and folate. I think a lot of people would be surprised because we often think that we should be getting our folate from leafy greens, which is great. Like eat the liver with the leafy greens, like eat them together, right? And then you get even more. And then in addition to that, vitamin A, I mean, vitamin A is crucial for reproduction. I really feel like that's a nutrient that doesn't get spoken about as much.
Well, a lot of people are afraid of vitamin A through pregnancy because mostly we just hear that it causes birth defects, right? We don't hear that it's actually an important piece of all this.
Well, it's essential. I mean, when you research vitamin A, there's some of the compelling research that I saw. I mean, I know we're not animals, but sometimes we have to gather some information through animal studies. So a couple interesting fun facts about vitamin A, like there's research studies where they're looking at suppressing a man's ability to process vitamin A as birth control because it's so essential for fertility and sperm production and testosterone production that if you have an animal study and you give them a diet that is entirely devoid of vitamin A, and we're talking about retinol, not beta carotene. If these animals are given a diet without any vitamin A, the male rats in the study stop making testosterone and stop making sperm. Like it was like the on-off button.
That's crazy.
And then the female rats, there's stages. So depending on how much the deficiency is, if they're able to conceive and like carry, the babies could be born blind, stuff like that. But then if they're even more deficient, they won't even conceive, or they will conceive, and they call it fetal reabsorption in these animals, which is essentially like an early miscarriage. So It's really interesting when you look into vitamin A. There's an interesting study that I'm sure we cited in Real Food for Fertility, and I cited in the Fifth Vital Sign, where they look at the role vitamin A plays in lung development. So when you're deficient, I mean, it could really have a negative effect. It plays a role in the development of the fetal heart and the lungs and our ability to see and hear. Mm-hmm. So by scaring women away from vitamin A entirely without providing any context, then they really do a disservice. When we look at kind of those real world studies where you just have a population who consumes liver as part of their diet. So there's a few studies that we've looked at that have just that kind of scenario. Then we see that in those populations where they just consume liver as part of their diet, you don't have this issue of birth defects. There's other studies that look at the difference between the synthetic vitamin A and the vitamin A that we consume in liver that show that the synthetic vitamin A, when you consume it, you produce a significantly higher amount of the teratogenic metabolites that are linked to birth defects. So
Right.
it's important not to like go hard, but there's a lot of interesting, there was this one study that I looked at outside of pregnancy. So this is a study that is just about vitamin A toxicity as a concept, not about the teratogenic aspect. And so it was this woman, it was a case study, and it showed that she had vitamin A toxicity. But if I'm remembering correctly, she had consumed something crazy like 400,000 IUs of vitamin A a day for like 8 years.
Oh,
Like it was like a really ridiculous. You're just like,
that's
what,
a lot.
lady, like what, who told you to do that? Like you're just like drinking the bottle. Like that's a lot.
Right.
Of
I was going to
vitamin
say,
A, right?
how is she even getting that much?
I know, like that's a lot, right? That's crazy. But then if you were to try to like do that with liver,
Yeah.
you'd have to eat like 8 pounds a day. Like it's just completely like illogical. Or you'd have to find a polar bear anecdotally because they
Right.
are all carnivores, so they just their livers have like a million IUs, like
Right.
so they're so don't eat polar bear liver, like you know what I mean. Don't eat polar bear liver. Don't take 400 IUs of vitamin A a day.
There is a limit.
Yeah. I mean, in the book we give some really, and if you're not pregnant, you can eat a lot of it. And the point of sharing an example like that is like you're not going to like outside of this teratogenic issue. If you are not even pregnant yet, this is your opportunity to get as much of these nutrients on board as possible. I love the analogy, the bank account analogy, which is true for anybody who's listening who has ever been pregnant or had babies and breastfed them. Then you can attest that this stage of life is literally just withdrawals. Right. I mean, I'm in it. I'm still breastfeeding. So like I just made a human and now she's drinking the rest of the nutrients. It's just all the time, just coming out. So from that standpoint, we really want to set ourselves up to go into pregnancy as nutrient replete as possible. Obviously, in Lily's second book, Real Food for Pregnancy, she provides an incredible amount of information and insight into how to optimize our nutrient intake during pregnancy as well. Mm-hmm. Many women, I mean, this is something where, again, I think it's helpful that we're not just coming from the standpoint of hypotheticals because we've both had children. And so this is obviously something that's very important to me because when you have children, it's one of the most taxing, difficult, challenging, also rewarding and wonderful, but all of those things combined, periods of your life. And so when we don't focus on nutrient repletion, building up these nutrient stores as a mom, we're not setting ourselves up for success because even if you are nutrient replete, even if you have all this information and you like really like take it to heart, you get your nutrient stores to where they need to be, you have a wonderful pregnancy, it's still hard. Right. The babies still wake up all the time. Like it's still demanding, right. And even with all of that, like you still want to focus on nutrient repletion post-birth. Many of us are in this stage of our lives where we wanted to get all of our ducks in a row before we had our babies. Mm-hmm. Many of us are trying to get our lives together. We're doing our schooling. We're trying to sort out our employment and our incomes. So many of us are having babies a bit later. And so what happens is that then we go from not having babies and being really afraid of getting pregnant to like, boom, boom, boom. We want to have all the babies right now. Right. And without that additional information, knowledge about the importance of, building up those nutrient stores, it can be a difficult time as a woman. It's very hard to do these things, these amazing supermom things when you're really deficient. Iron is really essential. And many, many women are deficient at some point. There was an interesting study that I looked at that said only 20% of women were found to go into pregnancy with sufficient iron stores. So when we scare women away from vitamin A and say, don't eat liver, I mean, liver is one of the best, richest sources of bioavailable iron. And yes, you can eat red meat, but iron has at least 3.5 times as much. Or did I say that right? Liver has at least 3.5 times as much iron as you would find in like a steak. So these are things we need to know as women. And the wonderful thing about liver is that you don't have to eat pounds and pounds of it because it's such a concentrated source that, a little bit on a regular basis goes a long way.
Right. And would you say that doing like a desiccated liver capsule, we can have similar benefits from a nutrient place. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the same thing. It's just, I mean, desiccated liver is just the same thing. It's just freeze dried and encapsulated. Right. So it's the same as food.
Right. That's what I do. So that makes me feel better.
You don't have to eat it. You don't have to, that's the
thing. Everyone,
like,
you don't have to eat it. You don't have to prepare it. Yes, the pills smell disgusting, but they're fine.
Yes, I'm a huge fan of desiccated liver. I mean, I usually have some on hand because mostly because I said, was recently pregnant. I'm in the stage. And even though I like liver, like Lily and I got together to record our audiobook, and it's so funny because she went to Whole Foods and bought like this truffle liver pate, or it wasn't Whole Foods, it was Trader Joe's. And we're in Canada, so there's no Trader Joe's. I was like, I can't buy like truffle pate. Like,
so Zares does not carry that.
I know, right? So I'm good with eating it, but most of my clients are not. Many of them try, and then they'll put in, like, they'll be so excited and eager, like they'll put in like way too much in the ground beef dish, and so take it easy. Like, we have some great recipes in Real Food for Fertility, but the capsules are the same thing, just as effective, because it's literally the same food, just presented in a different way.
Yeah. Okay. That makes me feel better, because I was this whole time I'm like, oh God, do I have to start getting over this and just like eating it? Because honestly, since incorporating the desiccated liver into my supplement routine, I do notice a huge difference. And again, my daughter just turned 5, so I feel like I'm finally coming out of my postpartum phase. Took a while, but we're like coming around here. And I do really feel like it's kept my iron more stable. It's given me more energy. I think it did a lot more for me than a multivitamin or a prenatal vitamin did, in terms of just how it felt when my body was able to use it. And if I ever fell off track and missed it for a while, I always notice. I'm like, okay, it's a good reminder that like my body enjoys what we're getting from the liver, and I need those nutrients. And I got over the smell very, very quickly.